All right. Hello, everybody. This guest has such a incredibly special place in my heart because I know her on a professional level and definitely a personal level as well. She is Kristin Chronister, and we're going to be talking about finding your voice today and the connection between the vocal area and the pelvic floor, and really all sorts of interesting tangents. So, Kristin, can you just say hi really quickly before I dive in a little bit deeper to who you are?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on, Bri.
Yay. Yes, I'm so glad to have you here. And yeah, so Kristin is actually one of my clients. We've worked together in my Transcend program, and she and I got to know each other very well over the last 3 months with our work in Transcend. And I discovered that Kristin is a trained opera singer. She has, gosh, I'm going to get this wrong, but 10 years of experience in vocal training, 3 degrees in vocal areas, as far as definitely being an expert in vocal and voice performance. And she also has the experience of dealing with surgery to the vocal area, plus she has the experience of having pelvic health issues. So all of that combined, really, when Kristin came on board to my Transcend program, she really kicked off some of our more intimate private coaching together. We have a group, Voxer, which is kind of like a little app where you can leave voice notes for each other. And everyone was introducing themselves. And Kristin kind of popped on and just really set the scene by talking about the vocal cords and the voice. And another couple of gals in the group too were talking about the voice and the importance of the voice and the pelvic floor, and was there a connection? And we really kicked off our entire coaching experience talking about the voice. It was so fascinating to me to see how that evolved. And now today we're talking about it here on the podcast. So I'm just so happy with how this has transpired. We've gotten so much out of really bringing the voice into our work as far as reclaiming our pelvic health, just making our pelvic health brilliant and using our voice along with it. And so I want to really dive in with that with you today, Kristin. Let's kick off with a question I have for you, which is, you really early on talked about the color of your voice. You brought that up in some of our conversations about the color of your voice. Can you kick us off with what that even means, and maybe even tie it into why finding your voice is so important when it comes to health in general?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the color of the voice is, it's a term that we use in the industry, I'll say, especially when you're learning how to sing, is to access as many colors in your voice as you possibly can, right? So classical singing, and I use this, I want to kind of blanket statement, almost all of my experiences with classical singing, opera singing in particular, we don't use microphones. We sing over 60 to 100 piece orchestras and to, thousands of people in a very large hall. So we have a very functional understanding of how to be efficient and athletic with our singing. Yeah. But that can be really cool to hear very powerful voices and very strong, rooted voices, or very high and floaty voices. But what it really comes down to is that singing is an art. So when we're learning to sing, we're really trying to learn how to access parts of our soul that we can experience for other people, and we can let that be a window into who we are, or in case of singing on stage, who the character is. What are the colors of that person, that character that you're playing? So we learned this early on, partly because it's functional for singing and performing to access these various colors so that the audience can have a more varied experience, right? You hear music sometimes and it can overwhelm you. And the behind the scenes on that is a lot of personal work and and for some people, it's magically very easy. And for others, it's a lot of self-discovery. Yeah. So colors in your voice and finding the color of your voice is sort of an inherent trait to being a well-versed singer. And that's where I come from on the idea of the color of the voice, but where I think it really translates to regular life and to daily life, even if you're not singing, is that we all have colors in our voice, or a color of our voice, just by speaking, just by crying or laughing or grunting, or, off the cuff, like,
Yeah.
Those sorts of vocalizations have a color. Whether or not you see it or feel it, it's there. And it's a self-expression that if you take away the idea of that color, it becomes very boring. And I don't want to say boring as in it becomes two-dimensional. It becomes just a sound frequency. But when you associate a color to it, it can really kind of invigorate it and make it feel a little bit more justified by the human experience.
It's so interesting. So as you're talking, it's reminding me of stage makeup and costumes and kind of like enhancing the character through these aspects like makeup or costumes or clothing, etc. It's just a way of enhancing the expression of the character. So
Yes.
it's okay. I think I'm understanding that now. So I have to ask you, when you first listened to my voice, what's the color of my voice? I've never asked you this.
No, I'm so glad you asked, because what I love about your voice is that it's very light and yet very clear, like very clear and sweet without it's free. So in a way, right? And I hear other voices, they sound more grounded and they sound more rooted, if you will.
Yep.
And your voice feels, a teacher I had used to say, and this is the voice should ride the breath. So imagine if you've ever been to a science museum and you see those tennis balls that sit on a puff of air, right? There's a puff of air that comes up and the tennis ball just bounces on it. Your voice makes me think of that. It's this beautiful bounce and lilting on top. And the color that it reminds me of is this kind of a pearly pink. So there's more that goes in it, right? It's not just flat pink. It's got these opal, iridescent, but very light and calming and soothing voice.
Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy. We've never talked about that. So this was really fun for me to have you explain that, or, your thoughts about my color. Thank you for that. I love the color. And what it makes me realize is that from the beginning, one thing that we noticed in our Transcend conversations, where we were just getting to know each other and kind of, again, kicked off our whole coaching experience with this talk about the voice, is that so many women in the group, including myself, have real hangups with our voice and about hearing our voice. It's hard for us to listen to our own voices. It's hard for us to express ourselves and put ourselves out there with our voice. And I think that what it sounds to me like is honoring the fact that all of us have a different color, a different way of expressing ourselves, a different costume, if you will, that makes us unique and beautiful. And we need to learn how to honor that and let it and kind of expand upon that color that we have, rather than trying to fit into somebody else's color, or rather than trying to hide out and pretend like we have no voice, because we do. We all have a beautiful voice that's a different color, and we just need to learn how to expand into that.
Absolutely. The different colors, I hear your voice as that pearly opalescent pink. Others may hear it as something different, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is that what I hear is consistent and it's true to you. So I also want to I think about the voice as a tool. It's not, it's not established at birth and then that's what it is and you just go through life and that's just how it is. I just don't believe that. I think women in general have a problem speaking up, but also sounding feminine. So in whether it's the business world or in their families, we feel that we will be more powerful or more listened to maybe if we drop our voice and make it deeper and make it stern and more choppy, that maybe sounds more masculine. And what that ends up doing to me, to your point, it's not honoring the true color of the voice that we have. And it's assuming that the people around you prefer to hear it that way.
Yeah.
And that's not always true. I mean, sometimes my children need a very stern voice.
Yeah.
And that gets my point across. And that's a tool I can use. Mm-hmm. But it's not necessary all the time to speak that way in order for them to listen to me. Mm-hmm. So that, knowing that the voice is a tool, you have a certain set of colors, you have a certain feeling when you're speaking, getting into that and then allowing it to expand with you and expand into other kinds of colors that might get you what you need in that moment, I think is really empowering. It's something that women maybe take for granted, that this is an inherent power that they already have, that they just have to unlock, because the people around us really want to hear us speak.
Yeah.
And I think that gets lost. Women, we think, and I'm a victim of this as well. I think, okay, well, I should stay quiet about this. I don't want to hurt someone's feelings, or I just need to get over it. Or really what it boils down to is I don't deserve to say what I want to say.
Or I don't want to be too much, right? I don't want to be too much.
Yes. And that's fair. And sometimes I do choose to be quiet. And I think that's another really, really important lesson, that in order to love the sound of your voice, you have to actually listen to it, which means you actually have to probably be quiet with yourself. And we can talk a little bit more about that, but also keep in mind the sound of your voice sounds different to you than the people around you.
Yeah.
So you can record your voice I'm sure I'll hear myself on this podcast and go, is that really what I sound like? And I used to fall victim to that as a singer. I recorded every single voice lesson. I got very used to, this is a typical method of learning. You have to hear what you sound like, because what's happening inside you is not what the others are experiencing.
Yeah.
So if you're in alignment with yourself and you're really in a good place and you're allowing your voice to flow freely, chances are the people around you will feel more relaxed. They will feel more at home with you because you're at home with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think that's what it comes down to, is this is just a way of, your voice is your expression of yourself. And the more you, I guess, just settle into and accept your own expression, like the way you sound and the way you talk, and just allow yourself to be that person, whether I'm an oversharer, I'm an overtalker. I talk a lot, and I can fall victim to feeling like being too much, or like this and that. I feel like my voice is too high pitched, all these things. But I've started to settle into just realizing this is actually just who I am, take it or leave it. And this is me. And I feel like it's allowed me to just expand. And I love this conversation because it's all about self-expression and self-love ultimately, and self-acceptance. So I want to, though, bring it into the pelvic floor and pelvic health, and your experience, Kristin, such a personal experience with having had surgery here and then having pelvic health issues, and also, just your training in understanding the anatomy between the vocal area and the pelvic floor. There's some really amazing similarities. Can you bring us a little bit more into the body now, a little more into the physical, and the connections between the pelvic floor and the vocal area?
Absolutely. So, visually, and I'll start right off. They look very similar.
Yeah.
The vocal cords and the vagina, the only really difference that I can see is, other than the fact that I know the differences, one is a vagina and the other one just looks like one.
Uh-huh.
So, and if we're sticking strictly to the vocal cords, right, the vocal folds and the way they function, they operate very, very similarly to the vagina. And I'm not talking about the bladder and the uterus, and because we can get into all of that and the muscles that support it. But the actual visual of the vagina are very similar to the throat because of the way they function. They both look the same. They have these kind of openings. They both like to be open and relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
They both like to be well lubricated.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both gateways to the outside world.
And they're both emotional powerhouse centers, as we've been talking about up until now. They're both areas of who we are, our identity, and our expression. But I'll turn it back over to you now. But I love this. I love this conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, the energy centers, and that's a whole, I mean, I feel like that could be its own podcast all on its own. Mm-hmm. But the functionality of the vocal folds and the vagina, yes, they're very different, but they both, in that obviously you're not birthing a baby out of your throat, mm-hmm. but you do birth creativity.
Yeah.
And there are these functional muscle groups also, you know, and I don't know as much about the pelvic floor, but the vocal cords, they're queens. And I think the vagina probably is too.
The vagina is definitely a queen. Absolutely.
they like to be there. I imagine them as, you know, that visual of Cleopatra being carried around on like a swing and like just feeding her grapes, etc. And she's sort of suspended and people just carry her around. That is what the vocal cords want. They want to be suspended and relaxed and allowed to do whatever they need to do. And they're going to completely rely on the muscles around them to support them and to keep them lifted and buoyant and efficient. And I feel like the vagina is similar. It's just held in place so that it can exist.
Yeah.
And relax and tense as it needs to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And your visual there reminds me of in one of our recent, I keep talking about our Transcend program, but I'm just going to keep talking about it. In one of our recent videos that I shared with you all in the group, I talked about the pelvic floor as being like a magic carpet. And so it's kind of the same, this sort of floating magic carpet that's not weighed down and stuck to the earth. It's not just floating out in space. It's floating in midair. It's kind of helping carry you and move you forward. It's the same idea, this sort of buoyancy, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I imagine it's also like a hammock.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
And for the vocal cords, the hammock is actually a really, really good example because the vocal cords, in order to function, mm-hmm. they need to just shift and tense and lengthen. Mm-hmm. So the hammock thing is really good because it is stationary. It's not mm-hmm. moving, mm-hmm. but it is kind of, the hammock itself is tied to these trees, if you will, and it moves in its own way. And I think many of the muscle groups in the legs and the trunk also do that for the pelvic floor and for the vagina itself. To me, it's like the throat and the vocal cords and this entire mechanism is sort of the top. And I know that it also is the top of the breathing mechanism. Yeah. But it is also the bottom of the pelvic floor is they work together.
Yeah.
So you can't talk about one without also talking about the other.
Well, you're so right, because I talk about the diaphragm, the breathing diaphragm, and the pelvic floor working together as part of the breathing mechanism. But honestly, I'm just not as well versed in the vocal area. So really thinking about that as the very tip top of the breathing mechanism, the diaphragm in the middle and the pelvic floor at the bottom, it really is absolutely all connected. And as we've been talking about this whole time, you don't want the pelvic floor muscles or the diaphragm or the vocal cords to be stuck and tense and rigid and tight. You want all of these various aspects of the breathing mechanism to be supple and able to respond to stimuli. So what happens if the vocal cords, we know what happens if the pelvic floor muscles get stuck and tense and tight. You get pain. That's one thing that can happen. There's actually lots of things that can happen, but pain is a very common issue that happens when you have pelvic floor tension and tightness. What happens when you have vocal cord tension and tightness? What does that do to a person?
Well, primarily, going to the worst extreme, it can cause injury to the vocal folds. The vocal folds are very delicate. So while they're very they can be very powerful, they're also very tiny.
Yeah.
So tiny.
Mm-hmm.
And they move so quickly that in order to watch them actually vibrate, you have to slow them down tremendously to see them actually moving. So, and because they're so tiny, if you are overpowering them with tension or pulling or pushing, they can be injured. So that's, I would say that's like the extreme version. And that is what happened to me from overuse and improper use of the vocal folds and the muscles around it. If you're tight and tense in your neck, you may also feel the very top back part of here of your head very tight, and your neck, jaw, shoulders can also be rigid. Yeah. And what that does to me personally, and I think probably a lot of other women and people, is pressure downward towards the pelvic floor. Because the pelvic floor, I mean, the vocal cords are, they're the princess, right? Like, they don't actually absorb the tension that the pelvic floor does, because what we end up doing is we push it down and push it down, and then it all collects down in the bottom of our bodies. So, pelvic pain is not unlike the neck, jaw, tongue pain. But when you're overly tense here, and I'm just dabbling in this, starting to learn a little bit more about the vagus nerve, but it creates a nervous system response that can leave your body in a fight or flight mode. So your body doesn't relax into that parasympathetic state, because it's always like ready to go, like ready to act and ready to move, even if there are no perceived threats. So what that does is that it's like the chicken or the egg. Like, did you respond to a threat and now you're tight? Or are you tight because, you're anticipating a threat? But either way, you've locked yourself energetically in this place that unless you release it, either through movement or singing or stretching and relaxing, you're going to be in a constant state of nervousness that can permeate through the rest of your body.
So is anybody else hearing this and thinking it's just like the pelvic floor? Because I am. I mean, that's my area of expertise, is the pelvic floor. And it's the exact, everything you just said, you could have been talking about the pelvic floor and it would have rang true. So let's talk about some specific ways that we can work with mobilizing and relaxing these muscles. And also, can you share with us, is there a way to help mobilize and potentially relax, exercise, etc., the pelvic floor using the vocal cord area as well?
Absolutely. Okay, so functionally, I think everyone starts from a different place, right? So where I start with some of this stuff is probably a little more advanced, which I think has been a hindrance for me in a way. I have a tremendous amount of muscle memory. So when I go to use these muscles, they activate in a way that it's almost too powerful for my body at the moment. So really, really identifying where you are is, I think, the most important step here, because we use our voices all the time. And they're exposed very often to the elements. So even if we have tension here, it could be because we're sick. So we need to honor where our bodies are before kind of engaging this stuff. But functionally, it all ties back to breath. So if you are, and singing, speaking, all of this is at its heart, it is the body's way of managing, in order to sing and speak, your body is managing intra-abdominal pressure. The vocal cords don't come together without air. Doesn't matter what you're doing. If you don't have air coming up through here in a steady stream, they will not vibrate. You will not have a sound. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It's just not going to happen. So regulating the breath, primarily, that's the first step. And I don't mean regulate like in your day-to-day life, although that is incredibly helpful, but to really tune in to inhaling for a certain amount of time, pausing at the height of that inhale, and then slowly exhaling on an S or a shh. anything that doesn't vocalize, right? So S, sh, those are all sustainable breath sounds that don't engage the vocal cords. So the vocal cords can stay nice and open and happy. But what you're doing is, if you can elongate that exhale, now you've breathed in for 4 beats, let's say, and then you exhale for 8. And then immediately, as soon as 8 is over, you inhale again for 4 beats. And then you exhale for 12 on that S. Inhale for 4, exhale for 16. And reach your limit and get to a point where you say, wow, I had no idea I could manage my breath so well. And the reason the S is better than just an exhale is that it is streamlining that air into this slow, steady, but consistent stream of air, so that you're not exhaling a lot at the beginning and then just letting the rest of it kind of trickle out. You're really managing it. And what that does, and I don't know the functionality of the core with it, except that it manages that intra-abdominal pressure without a lot of pressure here or on the pelvic floor. And what you're also letting your body do is to let it know to let go of all of the air and to actually expel it out. So you're not walking around or doing your day-to-day things with extra air in your body. Because so often we'll breathe in and we'll think we'll have exhaled everything, and then stale air just sits and sits and sits, and we only use this part of our body to breathe, and we haven't relaxed into the breath. So I think that is a primary way for us to manage or to mobilize that pelvic floor with this area. And then as soon as you pair that and you turn that S into a Z, which is a voiced Z, right?
Okay, a Z.
A Z. The Z now engages the folds.
Oh.
Now, in order to make a Z, you've created a pitch. And in order to do that, you're going to use more air.
Well, and I feel as I'm doing these, because the S and the sh, the S and the sh, both are great ways to gently activate the pelvic floor and the deep, deep abdominal muscles. So they're classic tools that we use in PT and core fitness land to kind of gently wake up those deep, deep abs and the pelvic floor. They're super connected. So to me, those are ways of kind of, like you said, managing that slow, controlled exhale, right? But then when I do that Z sound, which you just mentioned, to do the Z, I felt my pelvic floor activate even more. Like it felt like even more of a lift. Am I feeling that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Zzz, I mean, you can feel like, whoa, that really lifts everything up.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what's making the sound out of my vocal folds.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So the way, and I'll take a step back and explain how the vocal folds work.
Mm-hmm.
They work through suction. The air coming through them sucks them together repeatedly.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Bernoulli effect. Brunelli effect. I forget. It was a long time that I learned that term.
Something. Brunelli. We'll say Brunelli.
I mean, you can Google it and it's there. But the point is, and you can do it with a couple pieces of paper, but if you blow into between a couple pieces of paper, they start to move together like this. Mm-hmm. And what it is it's a bit of a suction, and this suction comes up. So if you think of the word suction, you really do think like it's
lift.
All coming together. And if you think of a balloon, this is another great way to think about it. Think about your lungs as balloons, and then apply it to the entire breathing mechanism. You poke a hole in a very full balloon, say it's full of water. Let's do water, but we could also say air, but water you can see. And as you press it, the water only comes out in the hole that was created. Mm-hmm. The more you press into it, then the balloon explodes. But if you press into it gently and you lightly create more pressure up here, mm-hmm. that's concentrated, then everything else starts to kind of tighten up around it and pull it up. And that is precisely what you should feel in the pelvic floor. I don't want to say I've struggled with breathing exercises from PT, but they honestly, in some ways, made some of my symptoms worse because I was using them like a singer and too powerfully. And I had to, and some of the work we've been doing in Transcend has been so helpful for this, and to hold it lightly.
Yeah.
So that when you're doing the zzz, everything should come up, because you're not creating a large sound. You're not adding a lot of color to the sound. You're not even opening up the resonators, right? It's a very focused bzz sound that comes out, which means that it's a very easy, light, but consistent strain of air. And that should, exactly like you said, lift, but gently lift everything, not like a tighten, but a gentle lift.
Which is honestly what we're going for all the time when we're doing pelvic floor exercises. I always want to caution people against the sensation of feeling like they need to clench and grip when they're doing a Kegel, for example, the Kegel contraction. It should ultimately be a very pretty gentle lift of the pelvic, like a squeeze and lift, but nothing like a clench and a super strong fist grip. It's not really like that. So I love this idea of using the Z sound. So then how would you, now I train folks in the fact that the higher registers can help lift the pelvic floor and the lower registers can help drop and relax the pelvic floor. Is that the case?
Well, I don't know about the pelvic floor, but I believe. I had a colleague and a friend of mine who once said that singing high always made her feel closer to God.
Yeah.
And I'm a mezzo soprano, and I never felt that way. Singing high was like, oh my God, this is a lot of work. My vocal cords are thicker and longer. And so that's the physics of it, is it can be different for different folks, right? So I want to put that out there. High for me is different than high for others, vice versa. But in general, the folds do lengthen. They do, I'm showing with my hands, right? And they lengthen, they tilt downward and lengthen. If they're running this way, in between, and this is the front of your neck, they will tilt down and lengthen to make different sounds. Okay. Lengthening tightens them. It pulls them because they're connected from front to back, right? So if they're connected from front to back and they're doing this, it's like a rubber band. You're pulling the rubber band tauter, and then you can, if you did it with an actual rubber band, you would actually hear pitches. And as you relax them, the pitch then lowers, right? The looser the hold, the more relaxed, and the lower the pitch. So you're absolutely right that when you're thinking of lowering and relaxing the pelvic floor, you're thinking of relaxing the folds, but what it really and truly becomes is not just relaxing the folds, but you're also slowing down the speed of the air coming out. Yeah. So when you can do that, and this leads into another great functional way to relax the pelvic floor, because the zzz will help you lift. There are some other exercises you can do, little roller coaster vocalizations that can lower the intensity of not only the breath, but also the mechanism, so that everything relaxes and it just kind of sits there. And in the registers, it's usually called chest voice, because you'll feel the resonation or the resonance of the voice in your chest when you're down here, because, and if I lower my voice even more and come down here, I can really feel resonance here. My kids they're like, Mommy, speak and be low, and they lay on my chest and they can feel it. And then the higher the voice, you can end up feeling it higher in your head.
So for anyone listening on the podcast right now, Kristin's actually touching her throat and her head versus touching down on her chest. And I'm wanting to experiment with this. Maybe we can all experiment with this a little bit. Like so I have a very high pitched voice. So I feel that I feel it a lot in my throat, and I can sense the feeling in my head too. So how do I bring it down? Oh, I guess I'm doing it right now.
You are.
Oh, yes, I am.
You are. And
yes, I am.
So it's so funny, because when I had vocal cord surgery, and this is a thing. This is a thing that singers learn. You learn to speak in your resonance, right? So Brie, your resonance is higher, and that's exactly where your voice wants to be. And I talked earlier about that ball resting on the breath. If that's where your voice is, that's where your voice is. Yeah. But it definitely can benefit from that relaxation getting lower.
Yeah.
What I found when I was doing speech therapy after my voice surgery, I realized that I was speaking to high. I was up here a lot because that's how the other women sounded. And trying to be like all of the other women. And I really worked on speaking more into my resonance, riding the breath while I'm speaking. And if I really did that all the time, my sister would make fun of me because I sounded like a phone operator. And I had this sort of phone voice. She'd be like, oh my gosh, just talk like a regular person. But what it does, it really does relax things down. So a couple of exercises that you can do for this. And I preface that many people would benefit from, everyone would benefit from a set of muscular relaxation massages before you do any of these things. So the breath is important, but I'll be honest, you can have the most relaxed breath in the world, and then you go to sing or speak and everything tightens up. That breath isn't going to help you because now all the muscles are too tight. So actually relaxing and doing, whether it's myofascial release, face yoga, anything like that. And we can do some face massages here and throat massages together. But that also will help set up what we're about to do in a, it's like stretching before you exercise.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of this as yoga. I mean, everybody could benefit from almost everybody can benefit from a yoga practice. And this is really what we're doing right now is voice yoga. And it helps relax what we're going to be moving into right now helps relax our pelvic floor. And I always say, even though I don't like making blanket statements, pretty much anybody, pelvic organ prolapse, bladder leakage, pelvic pain and tension, pretty much whatever pelvic health issue you're dealing with, almost everybody can benefit from actually starting with relaxing the pelvic floor rather than going straight to Kegel exercises. And, I love me a good Kegel, but I think that almost everyone can benefit from relaxing first. So are we going to go through some voice yoga?
Yeah, we can. I mean,
Let's do it.
So I think if we start, I would like to start with more face massage because I don't want to set the precedent that you can just go into and you can do any of these things however you want. It's your body, know yourself. But what I have found the most beneficial for any kind of activation here, especially if I'm trying to relax the folds, is to massage and get the body ready. And another thing.
Kristin, really quickly, I just wanted to let you know that for our podcast listeners who are audio only, we'll try our best to describe what we're doing as well.
Yes, absolutely. So important thing for singing, as you can imagine, is posture. And to allow your body to be a base of support for this area that wants to be suspended, right? It wants to be like this. And when you see opera singers who are really, really good, they look like they're talking, and yet they are not. Yeah. They are making a tremendous sound. And yet somehow it just looks like they're saying it like this, and maybe sometimes opening their mouth longer, but generally it's because they have this base of support. So getting your base of support is incredibly helpful. So if you're standing, widen the base of support, keep your knees unlocked. If you're sitting, make sure you're sitting on your sits bones, make sure your pelvis is not anteriorly tilted, which I do all the time. Really bring it in, make sure you're engaging your abdominal muscles without sucking in, but really align your body in the most, as we would say in Transcend, in your most perfect leading lady.
Queen-like and leading lady fashion, exactly.
Your leading lady, what would she look like? And this is a good place to start. So starting there, you start up from the top. So from a massage perspective, you're moving your way down from your forehead down into your neck. So if you start at your forehead and you massage around your temples with little circular movements with the pads of your fingers, it's not an exact science. This is not something that, and can be tailored for whatever you feel. And intuitively, if you find a spot that needs more work, by all means, go for it. I tend to have a very open third eye, but I know that in between your eyebrows can be a very tense place for some people. Work on that. Think about it. If you think about sound, it travels upward and outward. Your face, your head, your chest, but mainly up in your face and your neck and your head is where the voice vibrates and creates the colors of your voice. So you want this area to be engaged, elastic, buoyant.
Mm-hmm.
And as you move down your face, engage those cheekbones by lightly tapping. And you can do actual tapping or just walk your fingers along the top part of your cheekbones below your eyes. Kind of open your nose a little bit. Engage the sinuses. But what you're not doing is pressing or pulling anything. You're just waking the muscles up to let them know we're about to do some stuff that maybe we don't normally do.
Okay. So we're doing gentle little taps, gentle little massages all along the cheekbones, the jaw muscles, the temples. Okay. Yeah.
As you get down to the jaw, this is an important piece, right? So the jaw, the neck, and the tongue are very integrated. Mm-hmm. Your tongue is one of, I don't know if it's the strongest muscle. I heard it was. It's pretty darn strong.
It's very strong. Mm-hmm.
And it's very nuanced. So think of the language that you're using all the time and all of those unique vowel sounds. Just honor that your tongue does a lot of work. Mm-hmm. When the tongue is very tense, and we'll get there, it can pull on your jaw. So we don't start with stretching the tongue. We start by loosening the jaw. Right up in here, like and you can feel that the part of your jaw where it connects to your cheekbone, right at that ear level in your cheeks, and start by opening.
So you'll feel the hinge joint of your jaw open. If you feel with your fingertips next to your ear, that little ear area, I can't remember what the ear area is called, but you'll feel that hinge joint of the jaw when you open and close your jaw.
Yes. And those of us with pelvic dysfunction or pelvic health issues may find that our jaw is extremely tense, and this is really common. I have a little bit of a clicking TMJ on one side. I always have, but I find that it goes away the more frequently I do these exercises and these massages. So what you're doing is opening. What I would like to do now is with that kind of support and pressure of your fingers on your jawbone and on that hinge, open your mouth as wide as you can. And then release it back up. And do that once or twice. And doing that, what that does is it starts to stretch muscles that you don't usually stretch, because as you notice, even while I'm speaking, your mouth stays very small.
Yeah.
I have an elastic face, very elastic face. So, my eyes get really big, my mouth gets really big. That's just, I don't know why I do that, but it does. Other people don't do that. And if you find that you stay very small, that releasing your jaw this way.
Just opening your mouth for anyone who's listening, simply opening your mouth.
As far as it can go without pressing, it can feel very, I've loosened up maybe the back of my neck, things like that. So now that we've loosened up the jaw hinge, I want you to take your thumbs directly under the line of your jaw. So my jaw, I don't have the ideal singer jaw, because my jaw, it's a little bit more double chinny these days than it was before, but it is tighter here. So I have a lot of tongue tension. I have a lot of neck tension as well. Just, I think genetically, it's just the way I'm built. So this really helps to loosen that. So you're coming just under the jaw, right at the corner back there by your ear, and then moving, and I'll do it, and after I explain it, because I'm now getting into the area of my tongue, and the more I press on my tongue, the less you'll be able to understand me.
Yeah.
But you're moving you're pressing towards that chin, right under the jawline, so that you're releasing under here.
Okay, so Kristin's moving forward with her thumb along the under part of her jawline. So under the jaw, toward the chin, on the underside, just pressing gently with her thumbs.
And then now you can feel this with your thumb right here under your chin, that right in the middle, not near your jawline, but right under it. That's the muscle of the tongue.
My gosh. I have never explored this. Goodness gracious. So right now, for anyone listening, Kristin's just literally pressing upward with her thumb right underneath the meat, I guess you'd say, of her underside of her chin, like not the bone part, but behind the bone part of the chin, that meaty area.
Yeah, and I'll do my frog face so you can see what I'm talking about. This is my tongue. If I've depressed it, right? So you see how big it can be, and you don't have to do that, but as a visual, you can see there's your tongue is big. And it goes down way further than you think. But this is an important one because what this does, and we've loosened the jaw, which is important, but the reason most of us get jaw tension, personally, my opinion, is that if we're tight back here, we're also tongue locked. That can come from wanting to speak but not speaking. It can come from the way Americans speak. I mean, I'm an American, and if you're an Italian, you generally will have less tongue tension because of the way they speak. But the American tongue is very tense. So you move this, and you're just taking your thumbs and massaging it like your shoulder muscle. And it's smaller, so you're not going to take your hand and beat it, but that's essentially what you're doing with your thumb. You're just waking it up.
Well, and I just want to draw anyone's attention right now to the fact that the deep front line from Thomas Myers anatomy trains, it connects the every area that we've just massaged and then down through the neck and kind of upper shoulder muscles, but mostly the neck muscles, down through the trunk of the body, through the pelvic floor and the hip muscles and the inner thighs down to the feet. It's all connected, and it starts up at the jaw and these neck muscles that we're massaging right now. So all of this massage work that you're doing to loosen up these areas is going to be helping all the way down that train of connective tissue through your pelvic floor and hips and to your feet.
Absolutely. We're fighting gravity all the time.
Yeah.
And what the lower part of the body is doing is a tremendous amount of support for us. The pelvic floor is it's just so important. But when you think about the fact that air doesn't come in from the pelvic floor, it comes in from here. If this area is very tight and locked, it's really hard to get that deep, nice and low breath that you want. So these massages aren't just, yes, it's muscularly letting go, but it's also opening your body to receive the air that it needs to function better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we've gone through the tongue, we've come down through the face, we've massaged the tongue. This is the tricky part, but it's an important part. There's a bone right at the base of your tongue. You might be able to feel it. It's a U-shaped bone. It's open in the back, so you're not going to be able to feel the back of it. That's the back of the trachea. But it starts back here, and it circles around like a horseshoe right here at the base of the tongue. That's the hyoid bone. It is the only bone in the body not connected to another bone. It is literally suspended by muscle and connective tissue and your tongue. So we've loosened the tongue. And I forgot one piece that we can do, and I'll show it later, but to loosen the tongue even more. And I think it's called lion's breath in yoga.
Oh, I love lion's breath. I've done it in lots of my videos. You stick your tongue out and you go,
Okay. It's great. I like to do that after I've done all of this. But it's another tongue exercise. But the hyoid bone, if you find it and you locate it, directly below it should be a little bit of space, kind of like space in your vertebra, between your vertebra, that kind of like nice little space. Generally, and mine even today is tight. My hyoid bone feels very close to my larynx, which is directly below it. What we want to do is to relax the larynx away from that hyoid bone just a little, so that it has that cushy space in between the bone and the larynx, so that the larynx can tilt as it needs to. If it's too close to the bone, it's too tight.
So I feel like this is a very intuitive thing that I've never done this exercise, what Kristin is showing us right now. And I feel like I can do it without even knowing what I'm doing. So if anyone is participating with us and feeling that the hyoid bone, which is floating in your neck, essentially the top of your neck, and what you just said about relaxing the larynx away from it, right? I want to know how you would instruct people, but I would say don't overthink it. Like just sort of let it happen, right?
Absolutely.
And you can kind of feel it. Even if you don't know what's happening, you can just sort of let it happen.
Absolutely. And it's your body. What you're doing here isn't going to harm you in any way. You're really discovering something about your body,
Mm-hmm.
and you know when it's not right.
Mm-hmm.
And if you overthink it, I'm like the best example of overthinking. No good will come from that. So yeah, exactly. What you're doing is taking your pointer finger and your thumb, you're massaging that in between space, and then kind of pulling gently down on that larynx until it lifts itself back up.
Mm-hmm.
So you might be able to see.
Yeah. And just so everyone remembers, the larynx is the tube that brings air to the lungs. And then the pharynx, the esophagus brings the food to the belly. The larynx brings the air to the lungs.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Larynx is actually...
It's more the voice box, I guess, isn't it? The larynx is the voice box.
Yes, the larynx is the voice box, which is in the trachea.
The trachea,
which goes to the lungs. Okay. But it's exactly what you're saying. It's what brings air down into the lungs, and then what brings air up, and directly behind it. So this is your windpipe. Let's call it the windpipe.
Windpipe. That's the word I was looking for. Windpipe. Yes, our windpipe.
Directly behind it is your esophagus that goes into your stomach. So they're very closely related. You may also find that eating spicy food or eating late at night might give you acid reflux, which will then impact your vocal cord health. They're so closely related.
Yeah.
It's a totally different conversation.
Yeah.
But after you've relaxed this larynx a couple of times and you've let it like lower, and you'll see my throat is a little, red from it. That's not a bad thing. That's I'm just activating blood cells there. We'll get now to the original question of how do we relax the vocal cords? Vocalizing. I like to use a raspberry, which is, and you need a certain amount of tension. The reason I like it is because it pulls the tongue out of the way. It doesn't let the tongue have anything to do with the vocal production, even though it does, but it relaxes it. It kind of brings it out like a dog. And you also need a certain amount of lip tension in order to close around the tongue, which engages the mouth to direct the air out. And all of this can be done without vocalization. And vocalization is when your cords actually come together. They create a little buzzing sound in your throat, which then resonates through your head. So the buzzing sound is what we want at a very low pitch. So what I'm going to do, you may not even be able to tell that I'm doing what I call roller coasters, and these are not trademarked terms. They are widely known vocal terms, right? Little roller coasters where you're going up and down with the pitches. Doesn't matter what you're singing, doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't even matter if what I'm doing low is comfortable for you or not. You find that low, kind of comfortable place. You're not trying to be loud. You're just kind of, what this is doing is it actually massages the cords in a very low way by activating the breath up here. So I'll do a couple and I'll show you what that looks like. And then I'll show you a couple of alternatives to this if the raspberry doesn't work.
Okay. Now, are you roller coastering with your voice? Okay, so it doesn't really come through, but so your voice is going up and down a little bit. You can hear it on the side.
So if I do a higher version, you can hear it.
Hear that.
So, and this is true. This is just a physical thing. The higher the frequency, the faster the sound travels, and the more likely you are to hear it. So that's why generally it's easier to hear women who are high pitched than it is for men with very, very low voices that get lost. And you'll notice that too with people who have hearing loss. They'll lose the lower pitches first because it's easier to hear those higher pitches. Or unless you have tinnitus, which I think you lose the higher pitches because you always have a high pitch in your head. So just keep that in mind, right? What I was just doing was a very low, and I have a very low voice, but it is a very low lilting, like rockabye for your voice.
Well, and I want to bring it back to the pelvic floor because again, what my understanding is when you're doing that lower version, your pelvic floor is a little more relaxed. But when you are doing the higher version, the pelvic floor is also going to be more lifted and a little tighter. And so it's going to help push everything up as well and help make that be more audible and the vocal cords maybe push the sound out a little bit more.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, right, both are good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As a low singer, I tended to depress my mechanism because I was singing low repertoire. And so I had this kind of very earthy rooted color. And since the prolapse and since recovering and coming through, and a lot of this is vocal maturity, but I have found a happier balance with my breath and therefore better access to that upper register because I am not so expansive. Mm-hmm. Actually using the pelvic floor to help me, whereas before I was just keeping it constantly depressed. Mm-hmm. And that's a thing I think is a possible easy place for opera singers to get to, because in order to sing those long phrases, you have to keep that breathing mechanism as open as you can, as long as you can. And what ends up happening is the pelvic floor absorbs a lot of that pressure. Mm-hmm. I actually had a master class where someone told me that while I was going to go sing some, massive long phrase, she said, just imagine you're pooping.
Oh,
and I was like,
for a person with prolapse, this is like, no, I can't do this. This is not a good idea. This is not a good idea.
Exactly. But what I think is really what I found in recovering and rehabbing my own voice after several years off, and then also having this prolapse to navigate. For a long time, I was afraid to start singing because even though I know how to relax the pelvic floor, the muscle memory is there to depress it. But what you're saying exactly right, Brie, when you relax it, it just provides that nice buoyancy so that then you can engage it properly when you want to go up. So if I'm talking to, and I'll bring it to speaking, it doesn't have to be singing. When I'm speaking to my daughter, I don't speak like this. Right? I mean, I could, and I do. But when I'm talking about something happy, I say, I'm up here and I'm talking like this. And if your pelvic floor, if all of this is so tight, that isn't going to be, it's not going to feel as good. It's going to feel like you have something in your throat so learning to relax it down is really important to accessing more colors in your voice.
Oh my gosh, this is blowing my mind because it just ties in so nicely to everything we talk about regarding to pelvic health. You need to be able to relax so that you can fully contract. You need to have that full expansion, that full range of motion, and you need it for your voice too, to have the full expression, to be the full version of you, who you are, to express all of your emotions and your personality and everything that you want to portray to the world. I want to ask you really quickly about the idea of microdosing. We've talked about this a little bit, about when you do have a pelvic floor issue and you're wanting to use your voice to help rehab your pelvic floor. We talked about the idea in Transcend about microdosing the training and not diving in and doing like an hour-long training session right away, because that might be a lot on your pelvic floor. So how would you advise a person to begin some type of vocal training if she has pelvic health issues such as prolapse?
Yeah, so microdosing, huge.
The idea, again, just to back up on that, is to start very slow. Start with a very small amount of whatever exercise you're doing, whether you're doing vocal exercises or going out for a walk or something like that. Do much less than you think you should be able to do, and then you very gradually work up from there. So sorry, just to backtrack about what it even is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this applies to any athletics. Right. Yeah. So, and all of your programs and everything, start that small. That is so helpful for those of us who aren't fitness people to say, oh, well, I used to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and I still can, but then my symptoms get worse. So microdosing in this way for vocalization, I don't think you can do it without also building the muscles of your glutes and your core. Yeah. So that's primary. I cannot go back to singing ever in any real way without more deliberate exercise in those regions than I ever had before. So I think that's really important to know and to meet yourself where you are. Those muscles, I have found my muscles lose the strength very quickly. So that daily, whatever that cocktail of exercises that you do to keep those muscles engaged, the lower muscles that support the pelvic floor, but then also the core muscles that bring in the air and to lift everything up, all of that, very important. And I start any kind of singing by making sure I've done that. And that, of course, ties also in with the breath. So any of the physical activity you're doing, make sure that the breath aligns with it. Singing is it's always done standing up, right? It is a very rare moment that you see a singer lay down on a stage and sing. It's possible, but generally not the normal way. So you're fighting gravity. So, and you actually reminded me of this, Brie, in the Transcend group, is to get on the floor and get on your back.
Yeah, I'd asked Kristin, I said, could you, because the way we make exercises easier is by doing them on our back, doing them lying down. That's a much easier way to do an exercise than standing up and moving around, walking around, etc. And so I said, Kristin, can you sing on your back? And she said, actually, you can. I was shocked, but yeah.
Actually, and that's my very first voice lesson when I was 13 years old. That's what she had me do. She had me lay down. She put a pile of books on my belly and she said, start singing. I was like, what? And what I noticed, and this is another thing, if you're a mom and you remember, or if you actively still see your children crying, you can see their diaphragm moving and their rib cage opening when they're crying on their back. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing to see that this instinctive method of breathing is there in all of us. Yeah. And as soon as we get on our backs, what happens is we can melt in, right? We're not fighting gravity anymore. We're allowing gravity and the floor to support us. We can also feel our backs. So we have that kind of the touch of the floor to feel that expansive breath in the back body, which is incredibly important. Also making sure that your pelvis is in the right place by maintaining that neutral spine. So all of that is a way to start with breathing exercises. Some of these whatever it is, to doing it on the ground, because it allows you to feel that. It also distorts your hearing of your voice. So, and this is I think very important for singers, because we're so constantly analyzing the sound coming out of our mouths that if we go into this, we say, wow, I'm not going to really be able to hear myself properly on my back. So I'm going to detach myself from what's happening, what it sounds like, and I'm going to focus on what it feels like. And when you can get to that place, generally singers have a freer sound when they're laying on their backs, even though it feels and sounds to them not good. So that's where I've started. And I'll admit, I didn't need much time there. But it was important to note that, and I still think it's important to note, there are certain parts of my cycle where I feel a little more funky. So instead of singing standing up, I get on the ground. And I can still do the things, and I'll also say it's a better workout, honestly, to do it on the ground, because I have to really be engaged.
Yeah. Well, and you can feel everything so much more, I'm sure. You can just feel every aspect of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I want to, gosh, I could talk about this with you all day long, but I want to kind of wrap us up with some, I guess, like a summation of what we've covered and kind of how people could use this. Because I'm going to assume that most people listening to us right now probably aren't trained opera singers. And so how could the layperson use this at home? And we've given some great examples. How would you advise someone who maybe has some pelvic health issues? Maybe she's wanting to mobilize her pelvic floor, whether she has too much tension or whether she has some weakness. Either way, everything we've talked about is going to help you either way, because it helps relax you, but then also helps mobilize everything. So how could she turn this into kind of a routine, maybe a couple days a week? Or what would you advise, Kristin?
I believe in trying something new and trying something different. So especially with pelvic floor issues. So I would suggest adding one or two of these practices that we did today, primarily working your way up to being able to actually vocalize with this breath work. You don't have to sing, but you can. But that will help you have a different relationship with your body than you maybe have had it previously.
Yeah.
It maybe will return you to a part of your life where you did sing. Maybe you sang in choirs or on stage when you were a kid, or before you had kids, and now you're reconnecting with that part of yourself. I would suggest trying some of the things that we did today, as part, like I said, as part of that cocktail of exercises that you do, because singing is exercise. I would even go so far as to say as speaking is exercise if you're doing it for a long period of time. Like what we're doing today, I'm speaking a lot. I'd say this is exercise. I'm engaging things that I wouldn't be doing if I was just sitting on the couch. Yeah. So to recognize this as another tool in your toolbox that might be a little more fun than like doing your leg lifts on the ground.
Yeah.
That isn't super fun.
Don't you love the leg lifts?
I do, actually. I do, and then I hate them at the same time. But it's one of these ways, right, where we can tune into a different part of our body. I think it helps me distract away from my pelvic floor in some ways. Another thing that I think is important to test, if you're not comfortable vocalizing, to gently do a gentle lift of the pelvic floor, a gentle Kegel, as if you were going to go exercise, as if you were about to engage to bend over. To do that with the breathing that you're doing. And we did this with the channel breathing and transcend breathing. It made me think, oh yeah, you could do that while you're breathing like all the time. And that's a way to engage the pelvic floor in a way that is light and gentle. And then, while you're speaking, to think, maybe if I lift my pelvic floor, what does that do to my voice? And play with some of these things. And I think that will have way more impact than anything else that you could do if you were just sticking straight to the bulleted list of here's what my PT told me. Yeah. I think there's tremendous amount else out there. And I also believe full-heartedly that using your voice more frequently for yourself, not for other people, but for yourself, allows you to fall in love with the way you sound. Yeah. And that might make you feel a little bit more comfortable opening up that speech in other areas of your life.
Oh, I so agree. And it can be such a release. I know that I have done some emotional release work, emotional healing work, where I had to really tell myself and remind myself, okay, I'm alone right now. Nobody's listening. And I just allowed myself to vocalize, and sounds came out that I was sort of surprised were coming out of my body, but it was very healing. It was very therapeutic to just let this out. And it's very, we hold emotions in our pelvic floor and pelvic area, and we hold emotions up here in our neck, shoulders, chest, and throat. And so using this powerful tool to exercise our, throat and neck area, but also our pelvic floor, but also release emotion is really healing.
Absolutely. I can't speak to to how much more important the functional exercise is. Vital, has to be there, yeah. Right? For my pelvic floor issues, but the emotional work that it has caused me to really explore has been the most tremendous for my healing process. And again, I think using your voice is a tool. It's not the only way, but it is certainly a primal way to get in touch with yourself with really minimal effort and minimal repercussions if you don't do it right, because there is no right or wrong. It's just it exists. So
yeah, I think it's probably pretty hard to hurt yourself. It's possible, but I think it's probably pretty hard to hurt yourself or to screw up some of the information that we've shared today.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, if this was a group of singers, I'd probably but even then, singers, it's so funny. Every time I go to a doctor, a new doctor, they'll say at the end, are you a doctor? Are you a physician? Are you a nurse? I'm like, what? No. And they say, well, you just have this awareness of your body that I don't usually see. And I say, well, I was an opera singer, so my body is my instrument. Yeah. And this is true whether you're a singer or not. Your body is an instrument because you make sounds all the time. Yeah. And to see it like that, and not to say it's an object, but to see it as this mechanism that helps express yourself, you gain a self-awareness and a confidence that you know yourself maybe better than the people around you.
Dang, girl. Ooh, I just love that. That was a juicy way to cap that off. Thank you so much, Kristin. And I just want to share with everybody that Kristin does have a website. So I'll put her website in the show notes or the podcast notes, however you're viewing / listening to this. And Kristin, is there anything that you'd like to leave folks with about how they can get in touch with you, etc.?
Absolutely. Reach out to me via my website. Bri, I'll give you my email address, which the website will bring you right to that email address as well. But I welcome, and I'm very passionate about this topic, specifically with the pelvic floor, but also just singing in general. So I think there's a lot of work here that women particularly could benefit from. So if you're interested at all in the things that we talked about today, please reach out to me. There's a wealth of information out there that maybe isn't accessible yet. Maybe we can work together to make it so.
Yeah, this is not really talked about. I don't know, it's not cutting edge because this is primal. Like you said, the voice is primal. This is a tool that we've used throughout history to express ourselves and just live our lives. But it also isn't something people generally think about when they're thinking about pelvic health and healing, or even just learning how to express themselves and manifest things into reality and find their confidence and find their voice. I mean, you don't think about voice training and voice coaching, but it can be so helpful. So
definitely.
Thank you again, my friend. This has been amazing. And I'll talk to you later, and I'll talk to everyone else later as well. So goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so much.